If you're listening to this on the day or in the week that we are releasing this episode, you have hopefully just enjoyed and or survived at a minimum the holiday season. I'm Brendan Davis, and on behalf of my co-host Yingying, welcome to How China Works. I hope you all had a great holiday. I am recording this intro on December 27th, and it was pretty nice for me here in Beijing. Yingying and I had the real pleasure of sitting down with our guest this week just a couple of days ago. Our guest this week is Marcus Freitas. Marcus is from Brazil. He is a visiting professor at China Foreign Affairs University. He has had a very long and distinguished career, including a stint at Oxford. And on this episode, we have a pretty wide-ranging discussion. We limited ourselves to about an hour, but as sometimes happens when guests come over here to the home studio where we record these, there's noise or things that we have to wait on to abate before we can record. And we waited that out and realized about an hour later that it had been quiet and we'd just been enjoying talking before we actually turned on the microphones. So once we got on the mic, we were totally primed for a really impactful, fun conversation. I hope that you enjoy this. We really did. And one other note is that Yingying and I will be back next week with our year-end wrap-up / New Year preview on video as well as audio of what we've done this year. And we looked back and realized we've done kind of a lot of interesting things, and we want to highlight a bunch of the highlights for you. And we'll talk about what's coming in 2020, which we are super excited about. Don't forget that you can visit howchinaworkspodcast.com to learn more about the show, check out previous guests. You can make a donation in the spirit of the holidays if you're so inclined right on the homepage once you enter the website. But for now, please enjoy our conversation with Marcus Freitas. Well, we are very happy to be sitting here with our new friend, Marcus Freitas. How did I do with your pronunciation?
You did very well.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. It is a pleasure to have you here. We've been enjoying a nice long conversation prior to getting on the mic, and this happens sometimes. We talk an hour and a half and have a great time and then think, oh, we have a show to do. So now we're going to do this show. Please, let's start. If you would just give us a short introduction to yourself.
Well, my name is Marcus Freitas. I'm from Brazil. I'm a visiting fellow, not a visiting fellow, but a visiting professor at China Foreign Affairs University here in Beijing.
Wow, welcome.
Yeah, we're very happy to have you. And dear listener, what we have decided, because there's so many things we could talk to Marcus about, let's sort of start with something that you have in common with our dear Yingying Li, which is Brazil, of course.
Yeah,
and then we'll get into some of my nerdier stuff as we go.
Your first guest actually is from Brazil. So, bem-vindo. Bom dia, todos. So, it just by being here, it just remind me a lot of my old memories in Brazil. We talk a lot about this in our show before, how I get started to be very sensitive to cultural differences and how culture play a role between like East and West, and like people and companies, right? So just quickly tell us, like, how's your life experience here in Beijing? You've been here for a while, right?
Yeah, almost a year and a half. And whenever I get asked about my experience in Beijing, I always say to my friends that I'm enjoying it a little too much.
A little too much.
Also, like the awesome food and entertainment options available.
Yes, and also the sense, the sense of security that you have, and that's an issue that you have all over the world now. You know, you can go anywhere, anytime, and you feel safe. And also, I've been extended the red carpet by the Chinese, and I've all enjoyed the experience. So, it's a good thing to be a professor in China, right? They still have the level of respect, and they treat you very well in China, which is different from many places in the world. Mm-hmm. So I think, I've been given the red carpet. The Chinese have been treating me very well. Mm-hmm. And I've enjoyed this experience that I wasn't expecting it to be so nice. And that's why I'm saying I'm enjoying it a little too much.
I understand. I was a guest professor at Beijing Film Academy, and the level of respect of the kids is something I could get used to, frankly. It's pretty impressive how they revere the
like in our
education.
Chinese culture, we show our li, this etiquette. right? This respect our guest from afar.
Yes.
And 有朋自远方来，不亦乐乎, right? When you have someone, we want to treat the respect. That's our way to show our politeness and our culture. So regarding your position here, you're teaching at China
Foreign
Affairs
University.
University.
So how was the overall experience, and who you're teaching, and what special programs that you're leading, if there's any?
Well, I'm teaching the undergraduate students. Most of them will take their diplomacy exams. I already have like 25 students that have already passed the exam.
Right.
Who are going to be diplomats, and I always keep telling them that I want to make sure that they remember me. So if I need to ask for asylum, I know where they are.
Right.
Right. So so I teach them international law and international relations, public international law. And we've been organizing a few things. I took a few students to the annual meetings of the World Bank and the IMF this year. It was a very good experience because they had the opportunity to deal with many people in DC and also understand how Americans are perceiving China right now in this moment. So there are many things that I've been doing, but the most important thing for them, I keep telling them, is that they know that there is another country in the world besides the United States, and that's a huge country called Brazil. And the more they know about it, I think it's a good thing.
Regarding your particular experience taking students outside of China to feel how the world looks like, what are the key characteristics about these Chinese students, or in your viewpoint that the future China's diplomatic representative, like what are their ambition, or what are their, for example, characteristics?
I think they understand clearly that there is a change in the role that China will play in the world. I think that's the number one thing. And they realize that. Second, I noticed a sense of pragmatism that I didn't see in my Brazilian students, because I did the same thing with Brazilian students for 8 years. But by observing the Chinese, I realized that they make decisions quicker in a more pragmatic way than the Brazilians would do. And I thought it was interesting to see. Also, I noticed that among themselves, they had a higher level of cooperation to get things done. I set up a target for them. They needed to talk to people, right? And they need to network, which is not something that they're used to doing it. And I realized that they would go sometimes 2 or 3 of them together to talk to one person and use the other 2 that were there as a network for support to them while they were there. So, and that was a very interesting thing to see how these Chinese students, how they managed to cooperate and they managed to interact in an easier way when they're together. So it was a very enlightening experience to see their level of pragmatism, their sense of where they want to go, and this understanding that they can work together among themselves to reach the goals that they have set up previously.
You know, by engaging with Chinese students here, did you feel any kind of changes when it comes to the viewpoints, perspective about the world from them? For example, the media talk a lot about U.S. and China, but did you see anyone from your students group actually are having a more broader view than what just media talking about? If so, if you feel that, and what kind of experience made them to be acquiring that kind of viewpoints outside of U.S. and China equation, you know what I mean?
I think China and the students who reflect that of China and that moment of China, I think China is a very old country. You know, it's 5,000 years of history. But somehow China is also discovering the world, the same way that the world is discovering China. The Chinese are also discovering the world. And I think it's a good thing that the number of tourists of China into the world, you know, last year was 160 million people that, you know, have left China. If you think about it, you know, that's half the size of the population of the United States.
Exactly. That's why I was just doing the math.
Just traveling, right? In 1 year, which is impressive. So I think that they are understanding and getting to know more of the world. And the same thing trickles down to the students, because all of a sudden you have more students going on abroad as exchange students. Of course, they have the natural places where they go, like, the United States, the UK. But now, all of a sudden, you start seeing some students going to Spain, others going to the Netherlands, and some are considering going to other places. So what I notice is that there is a level of interest, but again, you have to take into consideration that there is a little bias here. My students are students of international relations who are planning to be diplomats.
Right.
So they have a natural interest in the world.
What's the diverse ambition look like from them? That besides being a diplomat in future, represent China. I'm sure a lot of them are quite proud of what China is right now, right? And considering we just finished our 70 years of anniversary of celebrating the PRC, right? This whole year, this dynamics, younger generation are more proud of what China has achieved. So what is your view on particular about this?
And not only are they proud of the past, and particularly what China has done over the last 40 years, right? But I think that they are very hopeful about the future, right? And that's a conversation I had with one person one day. I asked her whether, she saw in the current generation the same social fabric of the generation that placed China where it is, right? And she said that it's true. You still see in the younger Chinese that sense of building up the country, not eating from the legacy from the past or living on the legacy or what was done before, but their willingness to build a future. And when you start interacting with the students, you realize, okay, yeah, these guys are really getting prepared to play a role in the world, but mostly to make sure that China keeps growing the way it is. And I think that's a fascinating thing when you interact with the youth and you say, okay, yeah, they have a vision of where they want to go.
And what specifically is the role they want to play when it comes to international engagement, when they are going global, like among your students, for example? Like, what specifically? For example, they want to have a bigger voice when it comes to international convention, having a bigger say when it comes to building consensus in climate change, with the world discussion.
So, like, what issues animate them specifically?
Yes,
is there a commonality?
Do they have specific plans when it comes to, showcasing what China is? I mean, just give specific.
Okay, I can give you that. I think that the word that I realized that the Chinese, at least my students, the word that they like most, the expression that they like most is win-win.
Yeah.
双赢.
Yes.
Yingying.
So yeah,
I thought you were sing.
So,
that's an inside joke, sorry.
Yeah.
for the listeners. Yeah, it's an inside joke for the listeners.
Yeah, so elaborate on that.
But it's interesting because they don't like to see China as a hegemon, right?
Yeah.
And then I learned that the word they have for hegemon in Chinese is bachuan, right?
霸权.
Bachuan, which is a tyrant.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So the word that associates with hegemon is tyrant. And they say, no, this is not China. China wants cooperation. China wants win-win. Right? China is the win-win cooperation country in the world. And I think that it's interesting that you see that mentality. China is not a new colonialist going to Africa and, exploit the resources like we like to say. But the more I talk to the ambassadors from Africa, they say, no, the Chinese are actually building possibilities for us into the future. So I think that that's ingrained in the students. They understand that they see China playing a bigger role. They see China somehow, in some issues, leading the path. But they don't see China imposing its will many times in the situations. Of course, the economic weight of China and the size of the population somehow will make China be a little bit more assertive in certain situations. But I do see that they are trying to build up this mentality, okay, we need to have more cooperation, more win-win partnerships. And I think that's ingrained in their minds.
So, as we were talking before we got started, you have traveled so many roads and have such a broad array of subjects that you opine on or teach on. And I ask you essentially, so what is your primary mission? And you said, well, I'm here researching, I'm learning. What do you anticipate doing with this knowledge? How is this part of your overall strategy, game plan? And what are some of these other things you've learned, such as the win-win approach and things like that? What are some of the big takeaways you got from your time here so far?
Well, first of all, I think the most important thing is to understand that China is a very well-kept secret. Which I keep telling my friends, China is the best kept secret by 1.4 billion people, because we in the West somehow have this cultural divide in which between East and West. So we don't understand the East in a way. Second thing that we see happening is that not only do we not understand, but we are not interested in understanding.
I think that's, yes. Please continue, but that is the key. So I'm pausing to underline and amen that,
yes.
Unfortunately.
So, and you cannot do that considering the economic size and the economic growth of these giant economies in Asia.
Exactly.
So if we do see the pendulum of history shifting from the Atlantic to the Pacific, from the West to the East, you have to understand that. So why am I here? Well, I'm here to learn how these things are happening. And it's a very exciting moment to see a country moving on in that direction and somehow rising as an important player. Now, this is a very exciting moment for China. And I always go back in history to one day I was in Chile, in Santiago. And if you look into Latin America, for a long time, Chile was leading the pack, high growth rates and all that. And I remember going to Chile and watching this huge billboard saying, okay, we're going to grow 7% this year. We're very proud of our future, right? Mm-hmm. And you saw that Chile, the Chileans, now they're having some problems, but they had this idea of moving on and this excitement for the future. And I see the same thing now in China, which somehow is something that we Brazilians have lost. And so one of the things that I want to see is that how do you also build up this idea that, you are the country of the future, things are going to be right, and you're doing well. So what is the take from here? Well, first is to understand this country, which is a very interesting experience, and also understand how to relate to this country, because many people, as you know, don't understand it very well.
I think that is, again, hitting at the very core of this. And what you're saying is the need for Brazil, for instance, of course, applies to the world at large, because it's so hard. The show with what we do here is of course focused on trying to flatten the learning curve for all sides, both in terms of trying to share insights about how us Westerners think and how we approach situations or problems to benefit Chinese who are going out globally, but also to help, foreigners to try to deal with China in a more constructive and honest way. And so, I feel like this is a really amazing time despite the challenges. What do you see as, again, the Atlantic Pacific power realignment? I think I resonate most myself with the school of thought that we have this balance of power model. It's a multipolar world, but of course the two big poles are U.S., China. So as we move forward, what do you see as some of the challenges? What are the things that you're most tracking? And then we'll probably ask, what do you think we should do about it?
Okay, I think one of the greatest mistakes that we have nowadays is that there are many people who want to see the world in a bipolar way, right? I call these people the widows of the Cold War.
Ah, yes,
right?
yes.
People who made their careers, political careers, and also their academic careers, and even money and consulting, with a world that was split between the Soviet Union and the United States.
Right.
And somehow we try to use that Cold War mentality to build the framework of dealing with China.
Right.
Now, and it's kind of funny because you listen and sometimes people want to treat China like the Soviet Union. Others want to treat China like Japan. Like, Japan was an economic phenomenon, but, was not going to last for a long time. So what do we see? Is that, and what have we learned? And by living in China, you realize two things. One, China is not the Soviet Union, right?
Absolutely.
And second, China is not like Japan.
Also very true.
And both reflect the strategy of China over the last 40 years. In what sense? Well, why isn't China like the Soviet Union? Well, because China doesn't want to have the military power like the Soviet Union. China doesn't want to be a threat to the United States in a military way. Why? Because they have a complicated neighborhood. Like, 4 nuclear countries around them, history. They don't want to have an arms race. If you want peace, stability, and prosperity, you cannot have an arms race in China. So that's the first thing. So you can't compare that to the Soviet Union that wanted to play a role in, being like, the opposite of the United States and the ruling power and a leading power in the world. So China doesn't even want its ideology to be imposed in the world like, the Soviet Union wanted.
Exactly.
So that is the wrong framework. And the second one is that, differently from Japan, China has done the homework in the sense that it has become slowly the major trading partner for more than 130 countries in the world, something that Japan never had.
Yeah.
And it slowly is pushing countries to start using the RMB when they interact with each other.
Exactly.
Strengthening the RMB internationally. So you see that the Japanese model does not apply to China now. So what you realize is that somehow since 1979, when reform and opening started, and over the last few years, you see that China is building its path in a very unique way. And somehow we in the West are not understanding on how to engage with China. And you see that that's a misperception that you see in the United States, in the UK, in the European Union. Why? Because we want to fall into the trap of these understanding.
So what, in your view, worked for China in the last 4 decades when it comes to create this aspiration, prosperity that you think the rise of China is offering to the world? And what actually worked? What is the key?
I think you have 2 very important aspects that are ingrained in China. One is when you have 1.4 billion people, you need to be competitive.
True.
Right?
Right.
You're 1 in 1.4 billion. For you to shine as a star, you need to be very, very competitive. Like China, I'm always reminded when I go into the subway and you find an empty seat, it's the fittest that is going to find the seat because it's the one that moves faster to get the seat.
Right.
So it's naturally a competitive country. And Gaokao is a good example of that, right? Mm-hmm. You only go to the best universities if you do very well in Gaokao.
Right.
And you need to, Gaokao is their college entrance exam here in China. So you see that 1.4 billion people somehow creates this need for it's natural selection at its best, right? It's the survival of the fittest, and you have to be competitive. And the second thing is that Confucianism does play a role in the Chinese society. And if you go back into Confucianism, you understand the merit is a huge base for Confucianism. Mm-hmm. So if you associate competitiveness and merit, these 2 things together, somehow create a dynamic that is very positive for the country. And I think that's something that you see slowly China also getting back some values from the past, right? And you see this coming up again. And I think I would credit the Chinese development to these 2 basic factors. And the third one that I always like to also emphasize is that, your ruling elites need to like the country. Right? They want to stay in the country, which is different from many places that you see in the world. Like, some of the people in Brazil, they dream of having a house in Miami. and living
Right,
in Florida,
right.
right? And they're not concerned about the country.
They see it as an idealized version of what they have in a way.
Yes.
The change is probably see most is among the Chinese young students right now. They're more like a proud when they travel and they return. That's probably one of the proof that you say they want to actually build the country.
Can I give you an example?
Please.
I teach in France, right? And last February or March, it was in March, I was giving a class on China. And I had 50 students. 10 of them were Chinese, and 30 were French, and 10 were Europeans from the rest of Europe. So I asked them, I asked the French, who wants to stay in France? And out of 30 students, only 4 said that they wanted to stay in France.
Really?
I was surprised.
Yeah, I am too.
Right, because Brazilians want to move to France.
Because I've been to France, I'm surprised.
But they don't see the country moving in a way
right.
Yeah.
that
Being
will
a fish in the
generate
water.
opportunities for them in the future.
Exactly. Sure,
So it's a normal
sure,
thing,
sure.
right? The Europeans, I asked them, they wanted to stay in Europe, and some others wanted to move. But I asked the Chinese, who wants to go back to China, right? And the 10 of them said that they wanted to go back to China.
Yeah.
So if you have your youth so hopeful about its future and the construction of the country, you do see that things are changing.
Yeah.
Now, there was only one that said, okay, I'm going to finish here, and then I'm going to the UK to do another study, and then I'm going to go back to China.
Right.
And then I asked, so why do you want to go back to China? And there are 2 things that they listed that I thought was kind of funny. One, we don't like French food, right?
That's, okay.
And it was hilarious
That
because
is-
the French were really offended. You know, if you go to
Sure.
France, there is one thing that the French really like to brag about, and
it's-
they're right.
It's one of
French,
the most subtle, sublime cuisines in the world.
Right, French food is delicious.
Yeah.
And when they saw that the Chinese were complaining about that, you should see their eyes popping up and saying, "How really?" You know.
Yeah.
And the second thing is that they turned to me and said, China is the land of opportunity.
Right. Especially for them. And this is I taught an MFA producing program in Los Angeles between projects years ago on and off for about 6 years. And over that time, I calculated that roughly 400 of my students were Chinese. And, some of them, we track on social media and stuff, and some become friends or even colleagues. So of those people, there's a small handful who have remained in Los Angeles and are thriving and doing great, and a few who moved to other places like New York or Europe. But most of them, the vast majority of them, are back here. And their whole point of view from those who I've spoken with is very common, that they wanted to get out into the world, and they wanted to, in this case, learn, like the Hollywood system of how to, do entertainment. But they want to bring that knowledge back here to China and be more competitive. And that makes them highly sought out here. The people who are motivated are doing fantastically well here, better than their peers, because they have that expanded perspective in all ways. So I see that as really attractive. And it says so much that there's the magnet to return. Oh, hi, Yingying. Speaking of, you have an example sitting to my right.
And it was empirical evidence.
Yeah. It's prima facie obvious.
Yeah.
It's right there.
So if you ask a Chinese young people, be it your student or someone maybe not from Beijing and not living and working here when you travel, maybe Qingdao, right? You said you have lectures over there. If you ask, probably you have asked, if there's anything they want to see this country change to be, if there's anything they want to improve in their lives, what would that be?
I think that one of the things that they say is that they wanted to work a little less.
I don't blame them.
Right.
I don't blame them.
996.
Yeah,
I
the
don't blame them.
996 is not something that people look forward to. But you have an interesting moment in China, too, the one China policy, the one child policy in China, will actually make this the wealthiest generation in the history of China, because they are inheritors from all sides.
Exactly.
Right? So you're going to see that they are going to have more money. Now, what is the problem when you have more money? Well, when you have more money, you tend to want to be a little bit more spoiled. right? So what I think is that they want to enjoy life a little bit more than they did than their parents or grandparents did.
Right.
It's not. I do see that the social fabric is here to make China move to the next level, go to $25,000 per GDP per capita and all that. I see that.
Yeah.
They're willing to work, but they also are more willing to enjoy life a little bit more. And that is proven by the number of Chinese tourists that are going abroad.
And the number of Lamborghinis that have nearly run over me in downtown Sanitor.
Yes.
Yeah. 19-year-olds don't need supercars, by the way. If you're a rich Chinese parent, don't buy your kid a Lamborghini, please.
Yeah, let's shift the scene a little bit from here, Beijing, to back home, Brazil, right? In the year about 2012, 2013, when I was actually working there, when I just landed in Brazil, I asked my students, which are a bunch of Brazilian students, ask, what do you know about China? Raise your hand, just shout out keywords. And what were the words? What would the word look like? Jackie Chan, Bruce Lee, Great Wall, dumplings, no more. Or something like that.
They were out of ideas.
I'm surprised they knew so much.
Just paint a mental picture how far, how distant these two countries are, right? So from each other. Like, how many hours on plane you have to be when you're coming back to Brazil? Like 24 hours, right? So imagine, at that time, a few years back, that was probably the impression about China, based on everything they could get, really engaging with Chinese. But right now, we're at the end of the year, 2019. So a lot of changes happened during the years when it comes to US and China, Brazil, Brazilian relationship in terms of economic ties or cultural ties. What change have you seen when it comes to Brazilians' perception about China, Chinese market? And if you, let's suppose, last week or this coming week, you're coming back to Brazil, if you ask people around you, right? Would there be differences when it comes to perception about China, perspective about China's future?
You know, negative marketing is, what is the thing that they say? There's no
such thing as bad publicity.
Yes, there's no such thing as bad publicity. Yeah. And it's kind of funny because when President Jair Bolsonaro got elected, before he got elected as a candidate, he said, you know, we don't want China to buy Brazil. We want China to buy in Brazil, because there's a sense the Chinese were buying Brazil, right? And when he took over and became president, and he started developing a closer relationship with the United States. But it was interesting because never in Brazil people talked so much about the importance of China to the Brazilian economy. Mm-hmm. So when he was shifting towards the U.S., people said, hey, but remember this, China is one of our largest investors. China is Brazil's number one trading partner. Mm-hmm. Whatever we produce in agriculture is sold to China, not to the U.S. And the Americans are competitors when it comes to agricultural products.
Yeah.
Selling to China. So all of a sudden...
And he has to make a choice, right?
And people are just saying, hey, careful on the relationship and careful there because, and I kept saying that to my friends too, you know, the gains of the relationship between Brazil and the U.S. and Brazil and the European Union will be marginal while the gains with China can be exponential. Right. Just look at the size of the market. You know, every $1,000 that the Chinese add to their GDP per capita is disruptive. Like, you know, the Chinese had a problem with pork. Now they're buying pork from Brazil. The price of pork in Brazil went up. Why? Because the Chinese are buying it. Mm-hmm. So China has this disruptive impact in the world. So all of a sudden, everyone started talking more about China than before. Of course, we're still talking about China on the economic side, which will change as we have more people-to-people interaction. Now, what is the problem with China? Well, China is far away from Brazil. It's a long flight.
Very true.
There's a language barrier. But I think that the more we do trade, the more we have, you know, cultural productions taking place between the two countries. I think, you know, I said one day you're going to see a carnival parade here in Beijing. And you're going to start seeing these things. And I think it's important for Brazilians to understand that China has a tremendous potential. And there is a positive perception by the Chinese regarding Brazil. Whenever I say to people that I'm Bashiran, right? They always look at me and say, soccer.
Samba.
They talk football, and they start telling me about all these soccer players. And I think, that's the greatest soft power that Brazil could ever have, because it's a positive thing. They don't come to me and say, violence in Rio de Janeiro, rapes and, robbery. No, first thing they come to me and they say, soccer. Which is a good thing.
Yeah, one of the things I learned quite a while ago, and again, it's the political, my Western political views don't matter, but me not being a fan of the current U.S. president, when I would get into a Didi or taxi, and if it was somebody who was clearly friendly and wanted to chit chat, and I speak enough Chinese to be useful / dangerous, but not very well. But so they would, ask me where I'm from, and instead of saying, 我是美国人, I'm an American, I'd say, 我是洛杉矶人. Los Angeles, Kobe, so saying I'm from Los Angeles. Is like my little diplomatic trick to make friends, because everybody's interested pretty much, not that they have to be impressed, but everybody's sort of interested in that, and they have something they can relate it to. Occasionally it's, Leo, like they love Leonardo DiCaprio,
See?
So, because I'm here to make friends and be effective, so.
From this perspective, to show a strong signal, actually showcase how the image of the cities, like in China, could actually do with this, because when it comes to Brazil, think of football, when it comes to Kobe and Los Angeles. But maybe in some cities, for example, Sichuan, Chengdu, for pandas, right? I'm coming from land of panda, somewhere. I think right now, and again, we talked many times in our show, that in China, Chinese are very entrepreneurial when it comes to improving the industries and gaining opportunities. So they talk about cultural industry. They connect cultural industry with the soft power, with exporting cultural product. So what I'm thinking about, what do you see more specifically from Brazilian side that connect more specifically with some Chinese cities when it comes to this bonding cultural win-win match? If there's any example you can give us, for example, when it comes to Brazilians, which city do they remember most when it comes to the cultural thing about China?
Well, there's no doubt there's Beijing, right? Yeah, the Great
Wall.
Yeah, people are going to think about Beijing and Shanghai, right? Because those are the most famous cities that you have in China. So
those are the only two most Westerners can identify by.
Yeah.
That's why I feel very mission-driven that I want to share my hometown, which is like a Kaifeng. I told everyone that I came from a city with 2,700 years old, 8 times the capital city in China. Even we are third, fourth-tier city in China, but in China there's over 5,000 counties, or smaller division. But a county looks like much bigger than a city in the U.S., in Brazil. But how could you see this, the future trend when it comes to for people outside of China to be more interested in smaller cities that, other than Beijing and Shanghai? Do you see any changes or any examples?
Well, when you travel, you see India does a lot of that. They have that advertisement called Incredible India, right?
Yeah.
Right.
And, you should have the same things with the provinces of China, right? If they want to be more known, they have to do more advertisement on their own tourism and other things they do. People do know Macau a lot because of the gaming industry, right? And the gambling industry. Right. So that's Hong Kong.
It's a little hard to avoid Hong Kong, especially.
Yeah, Hong Kong, people talk about it. But other places have a difficulty getting identified because they need to do a little more advertisement. Now, for the longest time, don't think that this is a problem in relation to China. For the longest time, whenever I travel to the United States, or when I say that I came from Brazil, and people say, so how do you like living in Buenos Aires? Right? And they thought that the capital of Brazil was Buenos Aires, which is in Argentina.
Right.
And it's not, and what can I say? Is it the fault? Is that the Americans' fault? No, it's the fact that we're not
doing
publicizing enough. They're not doing enough advertisement of our city. So, and it's true. Like, if people think about Brazil, they always think about Rio. And when I say about São Paulo, they look at me and say, São Paulo? Yeah, and then they know it's an industrial city, big city in Brazil. But nobody talks about Curitiba. Nobody talks. Oh, we talk about the Amazon because we have the jungle, right? But outside of these things, that's what people talk about, and they never talk about the northeast of Brazil that has wonderful beaches, like the Caribbean, or they don't talk about the south where we have the pampas and places where you can ride horses, and then you have cattle and you have good beef and all that. So it is in that sense. I think that we should learn. Both China and Brazil could learn a lot from the Americans. Like, when you think about the United States, that there is Chicago, there is New York, there is Boston, right?
San Francisco?
You have San Francisco. You have LA.
Atlanta, Dallas.
You have more
dozen places you can sort of get a sense of in your head.
Right? Why? Because they have more advertisement. And also, they use the film industry to display these cities.
You're welcome.
Right? Use the city. And you think about Golden Gate. How many times have I seen the Golden Gate Bridge? In any movies that relate to San Francisco? Right?
That was a symbol when I got
California, right? In California.
Before I came to the United States, that was a symbol.
You really had to see
instead of the Liberty.
The Statue of Liberty?
No, actually, it was the San Francisco, the Golden Bridge.
Well, when people first moved to LA, and I had already been even working in film, but from the Southeast and a lot in Canada and a bit in Western Europe before I moved to LA, and when I got there, I had that massive deja vu thing that everybody does, whether you're a first day visiting or whether you've lived there, is you walk around like, man, this is so familiar. Well, that's because you've seen it 1,000 times. You've seen this view on your TV or the movie so many times it becomes familiar. And what I was mentioning before about the saying I'm Los Angeles people versus it's simply because if you say American, depending on who you get, they might be, there might be some a little too much home team pride on this side. It might become, it's a wall between us, or they might misinterpret that I'm trying to put up a barrier. But if I say Los Angeles, they always have some cultural thing. They this or that, or even if they just they've seen the pictures of the beaches, etc. So it's a way to try to make friends and build the bridges and everything. So I guess Los Angeles has become the most successful at what she's asking. Like how do you project the image? But soft power is an interesting topic because you can't legislate people to think that you're cool. Right. So a lot of the approaches here have not been effective because there have been efforts, but a lot of them have been to try to force certain things or certain messages in movies that just don't organically resonate with foreign people. Do you see, in terms of looking at this sociologically, here's the question in all that ramble is, do you see that trend shifting? Do you see, at least among your students, you have all these younger students and how they view China's role in the world? If you could sum it up, how do you think they see China's role in this new evolving world that we're in?
I think they see China as a leading country, right? And the leader. And they want China to be respected for its size and for its contribution. And they think that China somehow can build a new paradigm for the discontent, right, with the current order. And there are many countries that are complaining about this. Now, But I think China has to build up also a goodwill around the world from the people. And it's not going to be done, and I keep saying that to my friends, it's not going to be done through selling some of the Chinese culture to the world. It's not that it's not valuable. It's a 5,000-year culture and it has a lot to teach. But it's kind of funny because we live in an era where people want to buy things that are more plastic, more superficial.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that's the difficulty sometimes that the Chinese
It's new money.
Yes.
It's new money. There's the term nouveau riche, which is used by generationally wealthy people to look down on newly wealthy people because it's like they don't know how to act yet. Like they don't know how to wear it with grace and not be ostentatious. And inside the home, they may have, Picassos or Rembrandts, but you don't put a picture of that on your social media and brag about it.
Yes.
You know.
So I think the Chinese have to learn how to make their culture a little bit more palatable to the Western taste.
More relevant. Or
Yes.
also.
Yeah.
Now let me give you an example, which I found I feel very awful when I say that because I did that, right? First time I came to China, I went to the Great Wall of China. And I started walking and I had a tour guide, right? And we kept walking and walking over the Wall of China. And there was a point I turned to him and said, well, if I keep walking halfway that direction, is it going to change very much? I said, no. If I walk for an hour, is it going to change very much? Not much. I said, so let's go, because I've seen what I wanted to see, right?
Exactly.
And you should see his face. And he is, I don't know whether he was he got annoyed or he's this disappointment. I said, hey, this is the Great Wall of China. There is so much history behind.
Sure.
And here comes this Brazilian guy, really, not cultivated enough to
I know that
understand.
feeling. I was there actually at the Chinese city. Should I continue walk? Because look around, the same, right? But I actually, the result, I did insist, I finished that journey. Come back, spectacular view, actually. I spent a few hours in the Great Wall. But not many people do that.
You see, that's what I said. Yeah. But that's the difference. You're Chinese and Brazilian, right?
Exactly.
So that's what I say.
You're like, okay, I get it.
Yeah.
So it's more of this. Okay, got it.
So it's more of the same. So yeah, but and that's what I say, and that's the challenge I think that China, because the Chinese, they always want to give you the culture and the history behind it.
Right.
Without expressing too much.
But it's 5,000 years, and
it might take 5,000 years to
it
get
might take a little while, right? Yesterday I was talking to a professor, and the guy said, "Yeah, you need to read the history of China." And I said, "Which period?" And he said, "Start from the beginning." I said, "Oh, I'll be like 80 and I still haven't finished one dynasty, right? Because if I go into the details..."
So you mean when the aliens landed or when we have the books? I mean, like, where do we...
So that's the interesting thing. I think in this sense, so for Brazilians, you need to make it a little bit more palatable or easy to understand, Chinese 101, so people that start understanding. And with that, we always start on the surface and then we go deep.
Yeah.
Right? Don't try to get people to go deep initially because they won't do that.
Exactly.
And we were chatting a little bit before this that when it comes to East and West fusion or mixed, East meets West, we talk a lot about this kind of topic, questions, stories. So you touch a little bit about the Brazilian meet Indian, like India. What's the name of it?
Yeah, Ways to India. It was soap opera.
Yeah, can you share this with us a little bit more about why you like about it?
And why do you think, it was so interesting?
I think that roll out pretty well about what we're going to say next.
Yeah, I think that there is no culture that is more different than Brazilian, than Indian culture, right? No, the number of deities that they have in India. No, Hinduism is complex. Reincarnation. You have so many things that are very typical of Indian culture. That's kind of hard for you to convey to Brazil. Brazil is a new country, Catholic country, and the majority now having a high rise of Protestant movements and all that. But you see that Brazil doesn't. If I were to say there are not two countries that could be so distant. Well, it turned out that we had a soap opera called Ways to India. And we had an author in the novel that I think she spent some time in India. And what she did was to abstract or extract some of these peculiarities of Indian culture, create some personages. They were Brazilians, but they were dressed like Indians, and incorporate some words. And then all of a sudden, you saw Brazilians using some Indian expressions. Now, of course, the purest Indians are really annoyed with how they could do that to our culture and to our soap operas. Well, it turned out the Brazilians were using Alibaba and Namaste words in their normal vocabulary. And what is the most important thing is that the number of Brazilian tourists traveling to India more than doubled.
Wow.
If not tripled.
Wow, that's a real effect.
That make it more likable.
you make it more palatable, right, to the taste. And of course, when they go, they're going to find many other things. They're going to dive deeper into the culture. But you need to have that initial superficial touch with the culture. You touch it, oh, you like it, and then you go deeper. And I think that's, and I would say, we should do something like that with China, right? How can we find some things that are similar in China that we do in Brazil? And then you build the story of this Chinese family that migrates to Brazil, but they still have connections with China, and somehow they bring up the customs of China, how they find a Chinese wife and how they do things. It's an interesting thing. And I think if you do that, and, with 55 minorities, in China, China is also, a deep dive into diversity. But if you look and you start doing this kind of thing, somehow you're going to start seeing more Brazilians coming to China because they have these perceptions that were ingrained and built within.
And you could do that, Brendan, right?
Well, maybe. I was just going to ask you a question because you have your experience in Brazil. And of course, we were just getting acquainted earlier. But where you were comparing notes because your time in Brazil was a while ago, and so you're excited to ask Marcus various things, to compare. So, what do you think from the China side, as our resident China expert in the room right now? What do you think are some of the ways that you would like to maybe see things, shift and grow and change to help affect, like what you want? How does China help to do that? Like, what's China's have to meet in the middle? What does China have to do?
I think Marcus just touched the essence or the core of a successful cross-cultural communication or cross-cultural engagement. Because for two very dissonant, very different cultures to meet together and to be understood, you have to, again, build a bridge and toward the same goal, be closer to each other and coordinate, sometimes compromise. But that actually means... But think about me and you and build just a closer trust, a relationship. If I show my intention, my effort, my sweat actually in understanding about you, your food, your culture, your customs, I show my curiosity. And I present to you that what I have done, my research, my efforts in delivering, combining who I am with who you are. I show this piece of file, a piece of product, or this piece of, beautifully delivered story, you will think that I really did my job. I really did some work, and I show my goodwill, good intention. And you will do the same thing because we all human beings, and deeply in the psychological side, you will feel like, let me do something as well. And I want to also do that and in order to make us closer. I think that's very humanized way, like giant powers like countries like Brazil and China, US and China. It doesn't make too much difference than two-person to engage, to show how curious and caring about each other. I think these kind of stories will have tremendous potential and tremendous possibilities between countries or between East and West. Like you just gave a perfect example between India and Brazil. It's come very different civilizations. And China, US, same thing. If we could have more empathetic dialogues between these countries, not just that, dialogues could transform to be the format of documentaries, small videos, exchange programs, anything that we pay a little attention into this. Not just, hey, I want to build a bridge. I am Brazil, I'm China, I want to go all the way to other side. It doesn't work. It's all about if I'm willing to compromise in the first place, and I show my desire in understanding you. And that always work. Just, relationship, family.
Someone should create a podcast about that.
Who?
Oh, wait, we did. Marcus, we could talk to you honestly all day, but you have other things to do. Or do you have any kind of closing thoughts for us for today? Things you want to talk about, address?
I wanted to add two things, if I may. One, the situation between the U.S. and China is not going to improve, unfortunately, because that'll be the new normal.
Yeah,
it's a complicated time, right? It's a new normal that you're going to see, and it's a normal thing. One is rising, the other one is in a situation, transition, right? And,
Right.
And it's complicated, and nobody likes transition. Transition is always the worst period in the world, and we see many complications. But on the relationship between Brazil and China, or the relationship of China with any other country in the world, I think there is one thing that I learned about China, which I like a lot, which is the sense of pragmatism that you have in this society. Now, let me give an example. If there is a hole, right, anywhere, the Chinese go, they put a temporary solution to that hole, right? They fix the hole. And then time goes by and they start thinking on how to fix that situation in a more stable way. So they go and then they build something new and they took care of the hole. That was a problem, right? And by fixing the hole initially with a temporary solution, they were able to keep doing things.
Right.
Now, how do we do things in the West? Well, we find a hole and then we have, 5 years of discussions.
Right. We commissioned some surveys on
how to fix the hole, and we keep looking, and then we spend all the budget that we had for fixing the hole, all the study and the discussions. And 5 years from now, we're still talking about the hole.
And the hole's gotten bigger.
And the hole's gotten bigger.
Venomous snakes in it.
Yes, and the Chinese have already fixed the hole, replace the hole, and then they have another replacement just to make it perfect.
And they built a tower on top of it.
And they put a tower on top, and they're selling something on and that tower.
Right. So, and there's a guy trying to sharpen my knives in a scooter driving by with his horn.
There you go, right?
The old and the new,
right?
Living together.
So that's what I say, and that's something that China has the pragmatist approach to things. So we don't need to build the Golden Gate Bridge or the Qingdao Bridge between Brazil and China. Let's start initially with a wood bridge, right? Where we can cross things. Same thing, China. Wherever you go, you start with a wood bridge. It's a temporary. People are crossing, right? As they start crossing, they're going to realize, okay, we can do a better bridge now, right? But if there is no crossing between the two, then we're never going to go anywhere, right? If we're expecting to build the Golden Gate Bridge or build something fantastic, it's not going to happen. And in that sense, I agree with the Chinese, a pragmatic approach. Let's do something that is temporary, that has a purpose, which is to, let us in China know a little bit more about Brazil or France or Italy. And now let's have this bridge so that they can also know a little bit more about ourselves.
Oh, that's a fantastic summary or fantastic end to our conversation today, which I got inspired so much.
Yeah.
How about you?
Yes to all of that. I enjoy this, and I feel like we would love to have you back as a repeat guest when you can make the time, and we can have a whole batch of new questions, and it would be an honor to have you back. And Marcus, how can people find you and engage with you online? Where they're like, is LinkedIn the best place, or what? How do people sort of track your movements? Santa's got to find your chimney, so you got to tell. We're recording on Christmas Day in China, by the way. This will come out in a week or two.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Yeah, Merry Christmas to everyone. Happy New Year, too. Now, you can find me online. I'm on all platforms, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter.
Okay.
Twitter is MV Freitas BR, and, if you search Marcus V Freitas.
Okay, so use your middle initial.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
Well, we'll put some of this in the show notes as well. But thank you so much for being here. This has been great.
No, it's been an honor, and thank you very much for the invitation.
Okay, a few quick thoughts as we wrap this up. First of all, we were totally serious about being interested in a round two with Marcus. As you can tell, we sort of just scratched the surface about the things we could talk about with him. As he shared with us, Marcus obviously travels quite a bit for his professional endeavors, but Yingying and I were in agreement that part of what was so refreshing about this was getting to hone in on another relationship that China has with another partner in the world. And of course, Brazil, as was sort of alluded to in the interview, Brazil has actually benefited in some ways from the U.S.-China trade war. And as Yingying and I move into 2020, part of our focus is really expanding an even more global focus where other factors will come into play. And so the show is called How China Works, but we will look to examine other relationships in more detail, often where China is even a peripheral player, just so you know where we're heading. More on that next week. Thanks again for listening. Don't forget to visit HowChinaWorksPodcast.com for more. On behalf of Yingying Li, happy holidays, however you celebrate or not. I'm Brendan Davis, and we hope to see you next week on How China Works.